Not even including the 5 million non-Jews that were killed during the Holocaust. So in truth, all these numbers are almost double. You're going to struggle to find that kind of rate.
Forgive me, for I'm going to read off of my computer screen to get these numbers correct because this is from my book that I'm writing about genocides. 1 million non-Slavic Polish civilians were killed by the Germans, and it shouldn't be forgotten that 150,000 Poles were also killed by the Soviets. 10.3 to 21.77 million Slavic people were killed by the Germans. That's just civilians. That breaks down into 4.5 up to 10 million Soviet civilians who died due to direct war violence, like bombing raids, executions, etc. And another 4 to 9 million Soviet civilians who died from war-related disease or famine. And another 1.8 to 2.77 million ethnic Polish people. They were Slavic people. 250,000 disabled civilians, and 250,000 to 500,000 Romani and Sinti people, and 300,000 to 400,000 people were legally sterilized. Many thousands of them were forcibly sterilized, though, but we don't know the numbers of that. But out of the people who were sterilized, many thousands of them died from unclean surgical practices or a lack, a non-existence of pain management. Thousands more deaths from groups such as Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, the queer community, criminals, or asocials as they called them, civilian resistance members, etc., etc. Not to mention the 5,000 disabled, mostly autistic kids that they just thought were psychopaths and unfit for society.
That is an average of 4,000 people killed a day. During the worst 100-day stretch of the Holocaust, nearly 1.5 million Jews were killed, averaging over 14,000 Jews a day.
What about Rwanda, since you want to rank genocides based on a per-day death rate? Rwanda was 100 days long, and it had 1 million deaths. The average daily death rate is 10,000, with some days surging well over 14,000. I forgot to add, so I had to come back to this. What about the British occupation of India? In 89 years, 100 to 150 million people died. Someone do the math for me on that, on how many people per day that is.
That it was just barbarism and savagery.
And on the topic of countries that people deem as savages, therefore okay to colonize, what about the indigenous peoples of America? In the first 108 years of colonization, 56 million people died. That's not even including the continued genocide.
Obviously a level of sadism to saying something like, I want what you have and I don't care how you feel about it, right? We expect that out of animals. But there is something very uniquely horrifying about saying, I don't want what you have. I don't want your money. I don't want your land. And in fact, I do care how you feel, in that I want you to suffer.
Careful, you're dabbling in the idea of Jewish exceptionality, that Jewish suffering is more important than anybody else's suffering. You think that no other genocide intended for people to suffer, that the Jewish Holocaust was the only one that wanted them to suffer? You think that?
Industrialize the process of killing in such a systemic and efficient way never seen before or since.
Since you want the Holocaust to be so unique that nothing else compares, sure, the sheer size and industrialization of it is unique.
None of these Jews were incidental deaths. Every single Jew was directly murdered. Nobody died just as a byproduct of some disease spreading through a community.
Hundreds of thousands of Jews, and the others, which you don't name, died of disease and starvation because they actually used disease and starvation as a method, a tactic to eliminate people so that they didn't have to waste more bullets. So if we're going off of the 6 million number, which is generally accepted, I also accept it as the most reasonable estimate. Up to 3 million of them died in a death camp. It's only half. 2 million of them died in a shooting operation somewhere in Eastern Europe, mostly in Ukraine, like 1.5 million of them in Ukraine. And the other 1 million of them died of disease or starvation in a ghetto, or shot in their own home, or in a regular labor camp, not a death camp.
They were all hand-chosen by the millions, then exported to camps where they were either shot, gassed, hanged, or intentionally starved to death.
Right, come on now, you're a smart guy. Do you really think that the other genocides did not specifically choose people to kill?
There's a level of premeditation to the Holocaust that I think you will struggle to find anywhere else.
You think that it was all incidental? Do you struggle, perhaps, to understand that other genocides have been premeditated? That's not a unique thing.
Beforehand. Do we get that? Even like beyond the industrialization of it, created a blueprint for extermination. Their goal was to kill all Jews in Europe.
I said this in one of the other videos, but the US used Zyklon B first. The Soviet Union used the mobile gas trucks first. The gas chambers weren't new. The eugenics was all over the place. And the segregation laws that they based the Nuremberg laws on were Jim Crow laws. We were the blueprint for them.
Just shot in their houses or hacked by giant militias.
Yes, sometimes they were.
The most effective genocide in human history. There's a reason it's called the Holocaust.
The reason that it is called the Holocaust is also Israeli propaganda. The word is simply a synonym for genocide. And when Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish man, created that word in 1944, he was like, look, this keeps happening. That's what's happening to the Jewish people right now, and it keeps happening. And he named a bunch of other genocides, and then a couple decades later, Israel was like, that's our word. You can't use that word to describe anything else. And if you say anything else was a Holocaust, you're anti-Semitic because you're denying the complete uniqueness of the Holocaust. Organizations like the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem have wanted to erase all mention of other people that were killed during that time frame because they wanted it to be a completely unique experience for Jewish people. And very strong voices in that argument were Yehuda Bauer and Elie Wiesel, the author of Night, who, by the way, was completely indifferent to the suffering of Palestinians and denied that that genocide happened. Do you remember his quotes, right? Do you remember those?
Killed 2/3, 67% of all Jews across a continent.
Now you want to compare based on percentages? Okay, bizarre, but we'll go with it. How about the percentage of Romani people who were killed? Before World War II, it's estimated that 1 to 1.5 million Romani people existed in Europe. Birth records are not the best. But if you want to go with the highest estimate for Jewish people who were killed, let's go with the highest estimate for Romani people, 500,000. So that is 1/3 to 1/2 of all Romani people in Europe. But they generally are not included in Holocaust education, and I've heard that at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, there's just like a small little section on them in the basement because they originally did not want to include them. Even though the Nuremberg laws, which were the laws that segregated Jewish people, also included Romani and Black people, like in the law.
Something uniquely sadistic about the motivations behind the Holocaust. It wasn't under the guise of economic reasons. It wasn't let's enslave the Jews to get their free labor.
But they did enslave them for free labor before they killed them. In fact, that's how it all began in 1933 when Dachau was opened. And it wasn't just Jewish people.
It wasn't for territorial advantage. It wasn't we want your land and we'll kill you in the process to get it.
Was it not territorial motivations when they wished to conquer all of Poland for the land so that they could expand their empire? Was it also not territorial when they designed the General Plan Ost, which was the literal plan to take over all of the Eastern European countries, enslave and kill all of the Slavic people there? Plan which succeeded in killing 7 million Soviet civilians, including the 2 million Jewish Soviets.
It wasn't motivated by barbarism, by apathy, not even greed. It was literally nothing other than pure vitriolic hatred.
Say that there was no greed when they stole land, money, and possessions from their victims is so far detached from reality. There was apathy, greed, and hate, and to pretend like there was only one motivation is really strange.
People say that the only reason the Holocaust is regarded as severely as it is because of where it happened. And yes, that is absolutely true. But that's also very important to consider here.
There it is. That's why it's the most important, because it happened in Europe to white people.
Just that it happened within a civilized society.
By civilized, you mean white. What's really interesting about that is Eastern Europeans and Jews were not considered white enough. But now Jewish people have this proximity to whiteness.
But Germany specifically was seen as the peak of civilization globally.
Germany specifically was not the peak of civilization. That's a weird claim to make and a hard one to prove. They may have had intellectuals and philosophers and good music, but after World War I, they were poor as shit. They weren't leading the world in anything until the 1930s when they began enslaving people for free labor. However, if Germany was the peak of civilization, and that's why the Holocaust mattered the most, because it happened in a civilized society, then why aren't the 2 genocides that Germany committed in Africa also important? So from 1904 to 1908, in German Southwest Africa, which is modern-day Namibia, they killed up to 110,000 Africans. And during the same time frame, from 1905 to 1907, in German East Africa, which is modern-day Tanzania, where up to 300,000 Africans were killed. They were killed by violence, famine, and disease because they intentionally starved them out. That's a tactic they used kind of everywhere.
Some far-off corner of the world contained to a single country.
Do you mean a non-white country that the white countries historically didn't care about?
Or that it was just barbarism and savagery.
I really hope that you don't mean that genocides that were committed by non-white people were because they were just barbarians. But what about genocides where white people committed it against non-white people? Why aren't those studied?
People say that the only reason the Holocaust is regarded as severely as it is because of where it happened. And yes, that is absolutely true.
Interestingly, when Raoul Hilberg, the Holocaust historian, published his first study on it in 1961 called The Destruction of the European Jews, people were unconcerned. Not like they are now. They didn't want to dredge up the past and ruin any relations with any countries. And especially in America, people were unbothered by what happened in another continent to people that they really didn't like either, because as you know, anti-Semitism runs deep here.
I think what's particularly difficult for people to wrap their heads around is that Hitler did not really need to resort to force to do this. He wasn't Stalin. The people just worshipped him.
He didn't necessarily, but he and Stalin were pretty similar, actually, and people did worship him. But to say that no one feared him or no one was coerced is wrong.
Really frustrating about this video that I'm responding to in particular is that I actually agree with their overarching point, which is that we tend to teach history in a very linear way where we focus on single events as opposed to teaching history more thematically.
If you agree that focusing on a single event, which is the Holocaust, is a poor way to teach history, then why do you insist on the uniqueness of the Holocaust and its importance? That's part of the propaganda. I recommend this book to you, The Holocaust Industry by Norman Finkelstein. Both of his parents survived, and he's been a fierce advocate against Israel, criticizing them and, as he calls it, their perpetual victimhood and the exploitation of the Holocaust. And he's been an advocate for Palestine the entire time. While you're at it, read this one. It's about the misuse of anti-Semitism, also by Finkelstein. He's been called an anti-Semite forever. He's Jewish. This isn't exactly what we've been talking about, but it's along the same lines. Read anything by Ilan Pappé. This one will dispel some of the propaganda. This will explain the lobbying that Israel does in America so that we promote Holocaust education and deals and money for them. Thing by Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé. They've written a couple books together. They're both Jewish, and they've both been called anti-Semites for speaking on this. And this one is a unique one because not many people have heard of it. It's very short, but it has like, I don't know, 1,000 references in the back. It's fantastic.
I always hate videos like these because they remind me how the Holocaust happened.
Part of the propaganda is this overreaching fear of a second Holocaust happening, but at the hands of the Arabs this time, and saying things like, this is how it happened, is a warning. It's propaganda.
Because they're always guised as intellectualism.
Just a question, are you familiar with feigning intellectualism?
And then you look at their comment section, and it's not even remotely guised anti-Semitism. Remember back—
You're blaming her for the comment section, which she's not engaging with those comments or liking them or anything, but you're blaming her for it. She didn't say anything anti-Semitic or insinuate that the Holocaust didn't happen. One of the unfortunate byproducts of Israel's aggression, and as some call it, their perpetual victimhood, is that it's creating more real anti-Semitism in some people who may not have been anti-Semitic before. To cry laughing that the Holocaust is shoved down our throats is indeed a little bit anti-Semitic, but it's not anti-Semitic to say that the Holocaust has a heavy focus in Western education, while we don't really learn about any other genocide. That's just factual. To say that you don't believe in the Holocaust anymore is anti-Semitic, but to question the amount of Holocaust education we receive in Western nations and what propaganda might be pushed, just to question it, that's not inherently anti-Semitic, but that's what Israel wants you to believe. There is a fine line between saying the Jews control the narrative and saying that Jewish organizations and museums and lobbyist groups push to have the importance and the uniqueness of the Holocaust above everything else. Because saying this is one of the most age-old anti-Semitic tropes. But saying anything to the tune of it is a very fine line that you've got to draw.
Back in October, seeing a video by a large creator who claimed that the term anti-Semitism was created by Israel to justify its existence.
The word anti-Semitism was not created by Israel, but it has been weaponized by Israel purposefully to deflect any criticism that they might receive for what they are doing. Jews, Israelis, and Holocaust survivors have been called anti-Semites for decades because they've been advocating for Palestinian rights and criticizing Israel's actions. Organization Jewish Voice for Peace, which has been advocating for Palestine, has been labeled as one of the examples of anti-Semitism by the Anti-Defamation League, which changes the definition of anti-Semitism when they please so that it suits them and their goals. Comparing Israel to the people of Germany from the 1930s and 40s has been anti-Semitic for decades, but the very first people to make that comparison were Jewish Holocaust survivors and Israeli think tanks, and the comparison is illegal in Israel and Germany and soon in America. Why would that be illegal? That's what you've got to question. But if you question it, you're anti-Semitic.
I still have a link in my bio for Marwa's family who's trying to save her family from Gaza.
The I'm a nice guy trying to help a Palestinian family link in bio at the end was a nice touch. I was just going to put a little blurb about this as I was editing the last video, but this needs its own video. So I need to be extra clear. Comparing all Jewish people to the people who can't see from the 1930s and 40s, that's anti-Semitic, because not all Jewish people are like that. You can't just lump all of them together. But comparing the government of Israel to the government of Germany and Austria is not inherently anti-Semitic because the government does not represent its whole people. However, comparing this fascist far-right government to another fascist far-right government is indeed labeled as anti-Semitic. As I said, the first people who made this comparison were Jewish Holocaust survivors and Israeli philosophers. The entire purpose of equating Judaism to Zionism to being Israeli is to deflect all criticism. I think that's easy to understand by now, but they have such a strong nationalistic, ethnocentric identity as a Jewish state, and they want to be recognized as a Jewish state. But the thing about that is, like Islamic states, the rest of the world doesn't recognize, say, Afghanistan as an Islamic state. It's just a country. The connection between Israeli and Jew is so strong that they have said that all Jews in the entire world are essentially Israeli, and all Israelis are Jews, all citizens of Israel. That does not include Palestinians because they do not get full citizenship. But Palestinian Jews are not Jewish enough to be Israeli. It's almost like their nationalism was never about their religion in the first place. Israel has one of the most strong national identities of any country, and it is very ethnocentric, meaning that they believe that they are a Jewish state and that all the citizens within Israel are Jewish because they're Israeli, except for the Palestinians because they're not full citizens, and that every citizen of the world, right, who is Jewish could become an Israeli. Like, no problem. They could just move there and get citizenship because they are one and the same. In much the same way as they want to equate Judaism with Zionism. They don't want there to be a difference because if you criticize Zionism, then you're criticizing Judaism. And nobody really wants to look like a bigot, but there are some people that don't mind if they look like bigots. But if you equate all three of those, then you can deflect all criticism. One must question why it is that they want the comparison between one fascist country to another fascist country to become illegal, but if you question it, then you're an anti-Semite. Now, I don't subscribe to that, and I have towed the line with provocative videos that hint at these comparisons because, no, fuck that. You're not going to silence me with the fear of being called an anti-Semite. Now, being a provocateur might be the only thing that gets some people to realize that they sound like a Holocaust denier when they effectively deny the Palestinian Holocaust. They sound like the anti-Semites that they so vehemently hate. Lines that you specifically should not cross, the ones that I don't cross, is saying that Jews control the narrative or the money or the media. That's all anti-Semitic. But to say that Israel controls the narrative about what Israel is doing is just fucking fact. You have to separate Jews from Israel, and that's what a lot of people are not getting. I have never once said, nor will I say, Jews are the people who cannot see. That's just false because Israel doesn't represent Jews, no matter how much they want that to be. The long game that they have been playing to say, that's anti-Semitic because I don't like it, don't agree with it, and I don't want you to say it out loud, has been working, and it has the US government wrapped around their finger. But the people are no longer fooled. We see past that. Saying that's anti-Semitism is not going to work when you're committing a fucking genocide. However, that does not disregard the fact that there are real anti-Semites, and there are people who are using the pro-Palestine movement to disguise their anti-Semitism, and people who are turning towards the anti-Semitic side. And if you haven't noticed, the rise in anti-Semitism globally always correlates with the rise in Israeli aggression, and the rise, therefore, in Israel saying, see, this is the only safe place for us because the world hates us. I put the whole screen recording of Yuval's video up at the end of this playlist, but his whole entire point was that the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, not the genocide of anybody else who was affected during World War II, the Jewish Holocaust was unique. Unique, unique, unique. He said that at least 10 times. The entire argument of Holocaust exceptionality, this uniqueness of the Holocaust, which is what he was emphasizing, is that it was unique in every single way. And he goes on to point out all of the ways that it was unique, none of which are actually truly unique, except for the size and the scale of the industrialized killing process, the gas chambers. His points were that it was unique because it was intentional and premeditated, as if no other Holocaust, and I say Holocaust as a general synonym for genocide, was intentional or premeditated. He said it was unique because they were fueled by hate, as if no other genocide was fueled by hate. He said it was unique because they weren't fueled by land greed or the need for slave labor, which in fact they were for both of those things. He said it was unique because it was perpetrated by civilized people, as if other white European civilized people had not committed a genocide before. He also said it was unique because it happened to the entire continent of Europe. It did not happen to the entire continent of Europe, for one, but I didn't pick that part apart. And it's not unique because literally the entire 2 continents of the Americas were genocided. Almost the entire continent of Africa was genocided at some point, mostly due to white colonialism. And half of Asia was genocided during the same time frame as the World War II Jewish Holocaust genocide was happening in white Europe, where people care about. You know, the way that he said, there's a reason it's called the Holocaust. Yeah, the word Holocaust is also weaponized because if you say anything else was a Holocaust, you're going to be called an anti-Semite because you're denying that the Holocaust was completely unique in every single way. One thing that he said that I did not go over very much, but truly bothers me, is he said there's something uniquely sadistic about wanting people to suffer. They wanted Jewish people to suffer, and they did. However, that is not unique. To say that no other genocide wanted people to suffer, and that Jewish suffering is thereby more important to learn about because it's so unique, it's placing the Holocaust above all else, and their suffering thereby above all else. There are literal people out there that say that if you deny the utter and complete uniqueness in every regard of the Jewish Holocaust, otherwise known as the Shoah, that means you're denying the Holocaust as a whole. So why don't we flip that? Instead, let's say, if you think that the Jewish Holocaust of World War II was completely unique in every single way, then that is, in effect, denying other genocides. See why you're confused, because a lot of people want to rank genocides, saying that one is more important than the other because it's unique, 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 but comparing is not the same as ranking. It's literally just saying, look at the similarities between these two things, because then you can understand it more. If you know one thing, you'll understand the other thing, and then you can see how this shit keeps happening. Comparative genocide studies, books, and literal degrees have been around for decades. I have compiled a list of over 100 genocides in recorded history. I could go on and on. So if I were to tell you that the conquests of Genghis Khan killed 40 to 75 million people in the 12 and 1300s via famine, genocide, and androcide, you would say, wow, that's sad. But then, ow, kid. Then if I were to tell you there were a few more genocides in China perpetrated by Chinese people and the government itself, you would say, I wonder why it keeps happening. And then you come to learn that the Japanese invaded China and Southeast Asia during World War II, and they killed upwards of 30 million people during the same time frame as what was happening in Europe, but you never learn about that. And then you might learn what a gulag is. It's a concentration camp in the Soviet Union, and every country that they took over, they set those up, and they sent 14 million people, minimum, to a gulag during the same time frame as what was happening in Europe. But we don't really learn about that or the other genocides that they committed. And you definitely didn't learn about what America did to Japan during World War II, committing literal war crimes, killing upwards of 500,000 people with fucking fire. And you probably didn't learn in your American history class that we opened internment camps for Japanese American people and German American and Italian American, but we put over 120,000 Japanese people in camps in America during the 40s, and that was literally 95% of all Japanese people that lived in America, most of whom were second and third generation Americans, but they were enemies of the state. You might wonder why we keep doing this. And then you might look at, oh, well, the genocide of the indigenous peoples has not ended. And then you think, maybe they were committing the genocide of indigenous peoples at the same time as they were conducting the Atlantic slave trade. And then you might wonder, why do certain countries continue to do this? And while you're at it, you might learn, the British killed upwards of 150 million people in like 89 years in India and Southeast Asia. Weird. Why did they do that? You might notice a pattern of countries that adopted communism committing famines and genocide. You might notice that 5 to 6 million Afghans were killed in the Soviet-Afghan War of the 70s and 80s. You might notice that certain groups in the Middle East and Asia that start with the letter T, they keep attacking certain ethnic minorities like the Hazaras. And while learning about Rwanda, you might learn that in Burundi, there was a genocide that was perpetrated by Hutus, and then again in Rwanda the next year. You might begin to recognize the pattern, the 10 steps of genocide, everything that leads up to it, and then the denial. You might recognize that there are certain people and groups that continue to do this, and then there are certain ones that continue to be targeted. And you might notice that there are 13 genocides currently still happening, some of which have been happening since the 50s. They just technically never ended because there has been no international intervention. You seem smart enough is a backhanded compliment because of the words seem and enough. But let's move on. There is a journal article that you can look up on JSTOR. It is called The Holocaust in American Jewish Education, 1945 to 1960, by Rona Sheremy, like Jeremy but with an SH. Education about the Jewish Holocaust in America was few and far between until the 1960s. There were a few textbooks that came out in the 40s and 50s, but most people were relatively silent on it because they didn't know much about it. And the education that we did have focused more on Jewish strength and resilience and resistance rather than on their victimization. They focused on heroes and heroines, and one such heroine was a Palestinian Jewish girl who knew she would be targeted if she went to Europe, and she went anyways. She was so brave and strong, but why do you think her story has been erased from American education about the Holocaust? There is another journal article by Thomas Fallis called The Origins of the Holocaust Education in American Public Schools, and it kind of goes over how education about the Holocaust was not mainstream until the 1970s in America, and likely the same time frame for Canada and Great Britain and other Western nations that really started to learn about it when more information came out. And the education turned to the victimization of it and how horrible the atrocity was rather than putting up how brave they were. There was a man named Raoul Hilberg who published The Destruction of the European Jew in 1961, and when he did, publishers didn't want to take it. He was trying to get it published for years, and they were like, no, and no one wants to read that shit. We don't want to dredge up the past. In The Holocaust Industry by Norman Finkelstein, he talks about some people who wanted to write articles or books or dissertations in college about the Jewish Holocaust, and people were like, no, that's a weird topic, like that's too sad, don't talk about it. So yes, one of the bigger contributing factors of mainstream Holocaust education in America, at least, is the lobbyist groups. Something that I think a lot of people are forgetting, or maybe they never learned, is that Jewish people were not considered white, especially during the 40s. They were other. Just like Slavic European people, Polish people weren't white enough. They weren't the same as German white people. The same thing as Irish people. They weren't considered white enough. They were others. Jewish people have a proximity to whiteness now because of the relation between Israel and all of the Western nations, and because a lot of Jewish people are now seen as white, just like we see Irish people as white now, but back then it wasn't. Unfortunately, yes, it does play into that anti-Semitic trope that Jews control the world, and when you phrase it like that, the Jews, da-da-da-da-da, that's anti-Semitic because you can't lump all Jewish people together, like you know what stereotyping is, right? But what Israel wants you to believe is that Israel equals Jew. And therefore, if you criticize Israel or say that Israel does something or controls the narrative or that AIPAC controls American politicians, therefore, you're criticizing Jewish people as a whole because they want those things to equal each other. And therefore, that's anti-Semitic. But people with enough common sense to rub together to start a fire knows that that's just propaganda. I'm going to ask you a very blunt question, and I want you to think about it hard. I forgot to mention this in the last video, but I thought about it while I was doing dishes, and I thought, you know what? No, he needs to hear this. Why do you think in America and other Western nations that have great ties to Israel, why do we learn about the Jewish Holocaust from a Jewish experience over and over again in K through 12 education? When I designed and taught a course about World War II and literally all of the genocides that happened during the war, because the Jewish experience was not the only one, most of my students had never heard of the other victims, or what happened in China, or what happened to Japanese people at the hands of the American bomber pilots. They didn't learn about that. But when they learn about World War II repeatedly in K through 12 settings, they learn about the Jewish experience. Holocaust education is important, don't get me wrong. Students need to learn about that, but they also need to learn about the genocides that happened in the country that they now live in, like in the Americas. Why do students never truly learn the depth of the indigenous genocide? And why do you think that in America there are literal laws in most of the states that say you have to teach about the Jewish Holocaust? They give curriculum about it and everything. But there is no law that states that students must learn about the indigenous genocide. The Holocaust of the Jewish people during World War II is not unique, and it does not outweigh the suffering of any other genocide. However, in Western countries, that is how it is taught. I briefly mentioned that up until the 1960s, the little bit of Holocaust education in America focused more on their survival and their heroism. And I have talked about how in 1967 there was a shift in the American relationship with Israel because they were winning war after war with the Arabs, and we realized that they could be a proxy for power for America in the Middle East. And then when they were victorious, they started promoting this narrative that there would be a second Holocaust at the hands of the Arabs and that they needed a Jewish state to protect themselves from genocide again. And during that shift was when, in America, the education about the Jewish Holocaust shifted from their heroism to their victimization. I have been told at least 3 times by people of my complexion that Afro-Germans who were killed by the people who couldn't see didn't matter, because it wasn't a complete genocide, and they didn't get to kill them all, so it didn't matter. Yeah, just the fact that they were included in the Nuremberg laws along with Romani and Jewish people to segregate them and say that they couldn't marry and they didn't have full citizenship status, yeah, that doesn't matter. Yeah, just the 385 Rhineland bastards that were mixed race children born to a black father who was stationed in the Rhineland during World War I from, soldiers, and a white mother, a German, and these children were coming of age, like ready to have a baby in the 30s, and the people who couldn't see plucked them off the streets or out of school and sometimes forced their parents to sign a consent form to sterilize them. Yeah, they didn't matter. We don't know the true number of how many of those kids were forcibly sterilized, and that's just the kids. The adults were also forcibly sterilized, and we don't know how many black Germans, Afro-Germans, were killed because they didn't keep track of that. I have had the most disappointing conversations of my life with other hueless humans. There was a Jewish rabbi named something Siegel, and I mentioned him in a video earlier today. He said that if there were such a thing as gypsy people, then they should be included in Holocaust education. But he didn't believe that those people existed, so he didn't believe they should be included in Holocaust education. A gypsy is a slur for a Romani person, but that's the word he used. synonym for genocide. And when Raphael Lemkin, a Jewish man, created that word in 1944,
Okay, go watch their video and then go watch their other parts because they do a phenomenal job at dissecting Yuval's video bit by bit. However, the part that I want to discuss is Raphael Lemkin in particular, because he coined the term genocide, and the same behavior that Yuval displayed is also the same behavior that Raphael Lemkin displayed when Black activists attempted to charge the United States with genocide based on its treatment of Black people, in which anti-Blackness and the discrediting of victims of white supremacy continues to persist clearly. So in the 1950s, a group of Black activists, one of them, mind you, W.E.B. Du Bois, filed petitions in the UN against the United States. One was filed in Paris, one was filed in New York City, where they charged the U.S. with genocide. Well, Raphael Lemkin not only publicly disagreed with them, he went further to say that they were confusing discrimination with genocide, as if the treatment of Black people by the United States is not bar for bar how he defines genocide, if not how the Jim Crow laws inspired the Yazid's legal system. But that's for a whole other conversation. Raphael Lemkin went further to say how these communist sympathizers were trying to distract the world from the real genocides taking place. When you do not end your inner white supremacist beliefs or anti-Blackness, they will continue to persist.
Hey, how y'all doing? There's so much that I need to say. There's so much that should have been said. There's so much that needs to continue to be talked about. So let's get into some things. Straight out the gate, I just want to say I am in awe of the intellect displayed on this little dancing app these past 48 hours. Incredible conversations are being had, and I'm so happy to see the videos where you mention me, the videos where you just bring your own expertise to the situation. I am genuinely blown away by the support that I have received, like throughout. People who do not know who the fuck I am, people who've never met me, have gotten in the field for me in comment sections, making videos on my behalf, just DMing me sweet encouraging messages because they knew what I was going through for the past few days. I just want to say genuinely thank you, genuinely from the bottom of my heart. And I also want to say thank you to anyone who went to listen to my podcast, went to go to my Substack, subscribe to my stuff, listen to my content, left comments, left ratings. I've seen it all. And again, I am just humbly in awe with how you guys got in the field for me. Much love always. And I'm excited to grow and build with this new community that I've received through this experience. So let's continue to do that. Also, for those who were sending messages concerned about my mental health, sending me private messages, some of my mutuals were definitely checking up on me, which I really appreciated. I'm not only a smart bitch, I'm a strong bitch, and I have a really strong in real life community. So my boyfriend was here. I was at my friend's DJ set dancing till 2 a.m, eating dirty hot dogs and having fun. I went to Cinespia yesterday. I saw my grandparents this weekend. I'm good. Don't stress. I'm A1. So just know that like the block button works and your bitch has been using it and my mind is clear and I feel good. So back to the topic at hand, I saw Yuval's response video and I knew it was coming. Yuval has DM'd me twice. He DM'd me yesterday informing me that he was going to sit down to film this video and that he was asking my permission on whether or not he should tag me in this video or not because of the hate that I've obviously been receiving. Now, the explanation for this is much of the same. I have it in writing in the DMs. I also, you saw the video just like I did probably, and he explained this at the top of the video, where he basically was saying, he's done these reaction videos in the past and he's stitched someone directly or tagged someone directly and his community has turned up in their comments and he was trying to curb that behavior from his community by not putting my information or tagging or stitching me directly at all, because he knew that his audience has a habit of turning up in people's comments. So let me repeat that again. He said in writing and in the top of that video that his community has a pattern that he's noticed, so much so that he curbed his normal behavior in these videos of stitching someone directly or tagging them in the comment section or tagging their so people have some sort of avenue to watch their full video. Whether or not they do it or not, that's on them, but they have direct access to who the person is, their page, the ability to watch their full video to completion. He did not do that with my video, though, to curb the behavior, I guess, to save me from the hate that I was inevitably going to receive based on how you framed me. Okay. And on that note, I have to say this. I don't know. I've never gotten this type of attention on this platform before. I don't know if I'm saying the quiet part out loud, but I need to call a spade in this conversation. The rainbow of people who were speaking on my behalf, defending what I was saying, different races, different ages, different identities, different ethnicities, all things under the sun I saw. Defending me, speaking on my behalf, getting in the field for me versus the people who were defending you and how they were talking to me on your behalf is telling. It's telling. I have had some of the most vile shit in my DMs for the past few days from the people that you sent to my door. Okay? I have been called a nigger bitch so many times. I'm in the Twilight Zone. So again, like I said, I'm a strong bitch. It kind of like rolls off because yeah, I'm a nigger bitch, whatever. But it's also like, let's clock the T that needs to be clocked. There's a distinct difference from those speaking on your behalf versus the people speaking on my behalf. And I want people to see that. So let's do that. Now, specifically with your issues with my framing, I personally felt like you kind of doubled down. I do think you took some responsibility, but we're going to go through a couple of things. And again, like I said, I kind of think I'm going to make a full YouTube video on this whole situation from top to bottom. So if I run out of time, I run out of time. This is the last video I'm going to make about it. Okay, child, it is what it is. So again, you brought up what I said in the first video in this second response, and I'm just going to draw a hard boundary right now, and I'm going to look you in the eyes when I say this. I said what I said, and I apologize for what I thought I had to apologize for in the moment. I truly meant that apology. I apologize from the bottom of my heart genuinely for what I thought I had done wrong. And I'm standing by that apology. And I'm standing by what the fuck I said, because I have been proven multiple times over. You can hit my repost tab. You can see the video I just duetted earlier today, that I wasn't speaking out of my ass. Okay. Now, my third and final thought on this whole situation, on your response, on everything, is that you were adding screenshots to yours, and I think a lot of your followers think that added legitimacy to your video over mine. You even did the same tactic in this video, but I would be able to have screenshots too if you didn't delete the video. So there's that. And then on top of that, I could, screenshot all the horrible messages that I've been getting, as I'm sure you and I both know I'm getting, but because you said your audience has been hateful to people in their comment sections before. So I think you can understand what I've been getting. But the block button works. It's too much energy, and the burden of proof should not be on me, because I think we both know what I'm receiving in those comments. Okay, let's move on. I think finally, sorry, I thought that was the final point. This is actually the final point. A lot of people said this in their videos, but I think your first video that is now since deleted actually proved my point perfectly. That's why I'm not really hard pressed to be super like screenshot this, and this, because I think you, by the way that you acted, by the words that you said, by the dog whistles you blew, I think we both know why you took the video down. So there's that. Now, in conclusion, again, thank you to all the support. I just genuinely am still in awe and shock about what has gone on in this app in the past few days. Just genuinely. So my heart, speechless. But what I will kind of just close out and say is this. If you do not know who the fuck I am and you just met me, hi, my name is Madison, the creator behind the Madiswan channel. I have a podcast called Bloodstained where I talk about history through the lens of true crime. Season 1 is about slavery. If you're interested at all, hit the link in the bio. I have a Substack. Hit that link. Subscribe to the YouTube. There's a visual component to that podcast. So get into some things with me. Again, genuinely in awe. In terms of Yuval, no hate. I hope you continue with success in your endeavors. You're clearly super successful. That's all I got to say. Let's all move on. Okay, cool. Also, on the ending note, for real, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I would be remiss if I didn't put this in the video. The second DM, Yuval, that I did not respond to you directly for, but what you did say to me in that DM was saying that you saw the comments about you not addressing the anti-blackness head on, and that you want me to be rest assured that, you know, you're continuing to do the work, and, you know, even after this, you'll continue to do the work. And I really do hope that is true. You offered to do a DM exchange because the videos can be exhausting. I'm ending it from here. So whatever, you can respond or not respond. It is what it is. What I will say is I think it's interesting that the semantics of my original video were hammered down on several times, but your semantics get to be excused as being just weird. So, and then you privately talked to me about how you know you didn't address it. So, because the way we are taught history as a tool of indoctrination, but not a tool of truth. So we learn about things in a very linear sense and not a circular, holistic sense that's thematic.
As a trained archival historian who focuses particularly on the subject of slavery, I wanted to come back to this video because I feel like it ended up being the inadvertent launch point for a comparative discussion about slavery and the Holocaust, and it really shouldn't have been, because that was never the point. The point this creator was making was never a comparative one, and it actually is an accurate point. The way that we are taught history, and the fact that it is linear, especially in the American education system, is reductive. It is what allows the general public to have such a widespread misconception of what slavery is and was. Most people didn't even know that there was an East African slave trade. Most people are not even familiar with the Arab slave trade, which is already a problem because, as this creator says in the video, it lasted from the 7th century and literally ended in like the 60s. And ended is honestly rough. Okay, so let me just go ahead and say that when you start looking at history thematically, and when you stop trying to follow a specific timeline, it makes a lot more sense why slavery is not comparable to anything else. Off of sheer duration alone, so many things happened during the time period with which slavery was occurring that makes it unique to anything else. The way that slavery is recorded in historical narratives, the fact that majority of the accounts of slavery come from the perspective of enslavers and not enslaved people, because at no point during slavery did enslaved people ever have agency to tell their own historical narratives. Like, everything about it is unique. Everything about it is different. It's not comparable, which I think is the point that this creator was really trying to make, that got taken wildly out of context. Because contrary to responses that are being made, slavery, the slave trades, holistically, not ending until the 1960s, does state the obvious point that slavery was occurring in civilized societies. In fact, slavery is what built majority of the world's civilized societies. Slavery has contributed to the shaping of systemic structures that exist and permeate in these civilized societies. Slavery is not detached from the civilized world. In fact, slavery is the foundation of it. So yeah, I wanted to come back to that video to just emphasize the point of, like, first of all, why did y'all take that video out of context like that? Second of all, as an archival historian who focuses on the subject of slavery, that is correct. When you start viewing history and themes, you begin to understand that there are so many connections, so many different things that we don't even realize are happening. And we're taught to view historical events almost in a vacuum, as if like, oh, this is happening, and then this thing is happening, and this thing. And it's really, that's not how it is. They're all influencing each other. They're all existing within the same socio-political sphere. Like, when British Industrial Revolution is going on, slavery is still happening. Like, there's still things, they're connected. They're connected. So I just wanted to say that, yeah, and go watch that creator's video, because it's honestly very impactful and it makes a lot of sense. And be open-minded and stop jumping to conclusions, basically. Slavery should never be compared to any historical atrocity. You really shouldn't be comparing historical atrocities at all to begin with, but let's talk about slavery specifically for a minute. So as a trained archival historian focusing particularly on the subject of slavery, let me just go ahead and give you a broad depiction of what exactly slavery is so we can have a conceptual understanding of what it means when I say slavery is not separate from civilized society. It's not detached from civilized society. Slavery is the foundation of civilized society. Let's first start by establishing that the broad focus of this video is going to be slavery in Africa. First thing that most people don't understand about slavery in Africa is that there were multiple slave trades happening in the continent at the exact same time. There was the more known slave trade, which is the transatlantic slave trade, which is my area of expertise specifically, and then there is also the East African slave trade, which actually lasted longer than transatlantic slave trade. It lasted about 13 centuries. Started in the 7th century, did not end until like the 1960s. And that slave trade had multiple routes. It went from the Trans-Saharan, Red Sea, Indian Ocean, very impactful slave trade, millions of people affected. Now, the transatlantic slave trade, on the other hand, lasted about 300 years. It started in about the 1500s, ended in about the late 1800s. What makes the transatlantic slave trade very unique and a very pivotal trade is that it is considered to be the foundation of the modern Atlantic world. I'm going to just go ahead and throw out some key works if you're interested in learning more about the topic of slavery in general. In terms of primary source materials, like I mentioned, enslaved people did not have really any agency over their own narratives and how their histories were being recorded. This is important to know because when you look at primary texts pertaining to slavery, majority of them are from the perspective of enslavers. So I can recommend to you Thomas Thistlewood's diaries, Samuel Cartwright's writings about drapetomania, but both of those people are very pro-slavery and were enslavers themselves, and their works are disturbing, so trigger warning on that. Now, one of the few works that does actually kind of give a glimpse into primary accounts from enslaved people would be Bullwhip Days by James Mellon. This is a very good text to read. Other texts that are really instrumental to learning more about slavery include Orlando Patterson's Slavery and the Social Death, Jennifer L. Morgan's Reckoning with Slavery, Sadia Hartman's Venus in Two Acts, Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, Tool Your Institution by Kenneth M. Stamp. There are also some other authors that I personally like because my focus is really on medical, like institutionalization and slavery. So Dorothy Roberts, Harriet Washington, like these are some authors that I just really think have done critical work. If you're interested in learning more about these readings, want breakdowns, or if you're just generally interested in learning more about my focus area, which has to do with the medical system and slavery, feel free to let me know. And for those who are asking, that was the skin routine.